Hi everyone and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie. I am the senior editor here and I'm thrilled to once again bring you a rundown of our top 10 providers to look out for in 2025. And this time we are looking at CCaaS providers. And joining me for that conversation are two expert guests on everything CCaaS. Yes, today I'm delighted to be joined by Zeus Kerravala, Principal Analyst at ZK Research, and Liz Miller, VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. So thanks very much both for joining me, and let's get right into the discussion. But maybe actually before I will take a step back and just frame this slightly, and note that this isn't like a vendor evaluation where we rank the 10 best CCaaS providers. If that's something you're looking out for, go to Constellation Research. They'll have an evaluation. You can book in a meeting with Zeus or whatever to go out there to check out their market reports is basically what I'm saying. But for now, let's get into the discussion and talk about some of the vendors that are catching our eye with differentiated strategies. So the first vendor that I do have on my list is NICE. I don't know, Zeus, if you maybe want to start by talking about a little bit about why NICE is catching your eye for 2025.
Yeah, well, NICE, I think, remains the class of the CCaaS industry. If you want to refer to the Gartner MQ, don't put it on your LinkedIn, though, because the Gartner IP lawyer come after you for that. But that's another story. I think, with NICE, they were really early to embrace the cloud. They've been very aggressive with AI, and they can give you demonstrable customers that actually have used their product. So customer testimonials is very strong. And I think the other thing that NICE has done extremely well is when you think of CCaaS, nobody deploys just CCaaS. There's a bunch of other things that surround it. Workforce management, quality management, all these things. And they've made all of those part of their platform. Some vendors choose to partner, and they partner in a couple areas, but they've chosen to primarily to build their own. And I know through their sales cycle, when they replace a competitor, they typically replace 5 other products as well. And so they bring all of those together. And I think in the AI era, right, we talk about this all the time, where data's gold. There's an expression in data scientists, good data leads to good insight. Well, silos of data leads to fragmented insights. And if you buy all those products independently, if you can't somehow bring all that data together, you're going to get a bunch of fragmented insights. And so I think NICE has really done a great job of building their product for the AI era. One platform, they're able to service the entire landscape of what you would buy in contact center, with homegrown tools. And then I think on top of that, just when you go to their events, they roll out customer after customer after customer that are actually using their products that can give you tangible ROI. And I think that, for those things, they remain the class of the industry.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that their mindset has really been about the foundational elements that you need to not just have CCaaS. And I think that there are a lot of vendors that really focus on what's the list of how we get to CCaaS. And it's like, oh, voice. And like the conversation devolves from there, right? We all know that voice is hard. We all know that integrating voice with all of the other channels is hard. We also know that agents' jobs are hard. Cool. NICE has taken that foundational conversation and expanded it out to really say, okay, what does it actually mean to be a contact center within a larger enterprise that's looking to deliver these types of experiences? So it's not about, hey, we're going to be the platform that rules it all. It's really about the experience, and it focuses it back on the people who are part of that. Does the agent have the right information in the place where the agent wants to be to actually deliver this type of experience? And is the customer able to do what they want to do when they want to be able to do it? In order to get to that point, you need to have, yes, all the channels. You need to have all of the data, but you also have to rethink what data fundamentally is in an experience motion and an experience mindset. Layer AI on top of that. And then layer generative AI on top of that. If you haven't rethought what your pot of gold consists of, that like, yeah, it's okay to have some rubies and sapphires up in there. You're still going to make a lot of money, right? Like, yeah. I think it's recast the pot of gold so that data in a NICE mindset fits in with an organization where the organization says to itself, okay, yes, we have this transactional data. Yes, we have this event stream data. Yes, we have this interaction data, but we also have all this stuff called content. What if we started to think about that as data? We also have all of this institutional goodness that we sometimes call knowledge. What do we do with that? How do we stop limiting these words that we use traditionally within the walls of the contact center and within the traditional buying motion of CCaaS, how do we expand those out to actually create those connectors for what knowledge means for the enterprise, not just what knowledge means for CCaaS? And NICE has really thought that through. And with folks like Barack and with folks like Barry and with they have really sat down and had very intentional, purposeful conversations. And that comes through in the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I will say too, on the tech front, I think NICE is also the gold standard in WEM, which ties very well with,
for sure.
with CCaaS.
Where most companies partner there, right? So
Yeah. They definitely they are that standard in both of those, and WM is a very interesting place because I think a lot of people are waking up and realizing that some of the digital and self-service motions that people have in service are really valuable for the rest of the organization. And that means that a lot of workforce management companies, a lot of human capital management companies are taking notice and are thinking, should I be offering solutions into service? Should I be offering some of my solutions into contact center? And I think that's going to be really disruptive for some other vendors. I don't think it's really going to, it's not even going to ripple into folks like NICE, right? Because I think they really have thought through a lot of these issues. I will say for NICE, especially in the year ahead, you've got, and one of the reasons why they bubbled up to the top for me on ones to watch and Zeus, I'm super curious if you had this thought too. They're going through a big transition. They're getting a new CEO, but they're getting a new CEO who has lived and breathed the life of the CIO for decades, right? Scott Russell is someone who is not coming with, I don't know what anything in this space is. He has had a very large customer experience portfolio that may not have included CCaaS, but has included the rest of customer experience technologies.
That's interesting.
He comes with a large Rolodex.
This isn't typically a CIO buy.
Exactly.
But more and more, I think with AI, it's going to pivot that way. And so that's going to be interesting to see how they pivot their messaging from the pure contact center buyer to CIO messaging.
Yeah.
And
we've seen that reflected in the customers that they've allowed us to talk to, right? And the customers, like you brought that up, I thought it was a great point. We've seen CIO customers be like, that's not how we're limiting ourselves. That's not what we're just doing.
Yeah.
So super interesting, going to be for next year. Keep an eye out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to see, actually, Des and I have talked before a little bit about how SAP is a very good being a platform company too, and whether that's the next step for NICE. But maybe that's a conversation for the other day because we have nine other vendors to talk through. So Microsoft is the next one on our list. So they came out with their Dynamics 365 contact center in July this year. I actually went to their experience center in London last week to check it out, and I was impressed by the maturity of it. Liz, I don't know if you maybe want to start by talking about Microsoft.
I think that Microsoft saw the writing on the wall and realized that if you are going to have a platform like Dynamics that encompasses all of the areas of how we deliver and how we connect customer experience back into our larger cloud infrastructure, you can't ignore CCaaS. You can't ignore that pillar of technology. And I think it became harder and harder and harder for them to stay out of the game. And I think that they came forward with an offering that some people criticized as being too late. And I think that's a fair criticism. But I think that it was also a scenario where they had to take their time. It is a mature market. There are a lot of really solid players. I think that the customers that I've spoken with who have been looking at experimenting, testing, looking at the Microsoft solution are really interested in that ease of use. There's this idea that, an agent who sits down in front of it kind of knows what that interface is. It feels comfortable. Data can also be leveled up wherever that agent works and wherever that agent is working. But it is also fantastic for people who don't necessarily work in the traditional contact center, right? So it can level up that information and that functionality wherever, if you're a seller and you're in Viva all day, if you're if you're in marketing and you're in Dynamics marketing all day, you're still getting that goodness up leveled into you. It's very easy to integrate and natively integrate that data. So I think that easy button was a really important feature to install when they were building this out. I think that where they might see some challenges and they might see a little headwinds in that is in people really looking at it and saying, am I going to take out something that I have and put in put in a Microsoft CCaaS. I think that's yet to be seen. I think the early motions have been folks who are like, hey, I'm on Microsoft, I'm on Dynamics, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to move over to this because it feels really easy. So I think the reason why I put them on the list and why they came to mind was I think 2025 is going to be a real test for them, but it also could be a really big opportunity, right? You've got a lot of contracts that are coming up for renegotiation, especially in the mid-market. You have a lot of opportunity for Microsoft to bundle all of these things with an already well-used Teams solution. And Zeus is going to have far more to say about how the integration on that is going or whether that is something that people should be doing. But I think as video becomes more top of mind, it's something that we can't ignore.
Yeah, I think, the pure CCaaS product, I think they're going to struggle to come into the blocks. I don't know what the product quality is like, but Microsoft historically has come to market with products that are, I don't want to say half-baked, but three-quarters baked. And like you look at the early versions, Teams and Link and all the other versions, and you can't do that in the contact center. What really intrigues me about Microsoft in CX, though, is Queues. The Queues app, and so when you talk about, and it's related to Dynamics, it's built off the same platform that the Dynamics 365 is, right? And so when you talk about customer experience, in CCaaS, there's a bunch of users that aren't agents that use the product today, salespeople, marketing people. These are people that live in teams, right? So instead of forcing them to go to CCaaS, they're bringing CCaaS to Teams through queues. And so all those workers now can handle, can manage call queues, they can handle inbound calls, they can access reports, analyze data, they can use the digital channels to talk to customers. So all the things a non-traditional agent needs to do who doesn't live in the agent dashboard, they live in Teams, now have access to the Teams capability. And I think that's the right approach for Microsoft, is really push Queues app, use that as a way to kind of backdoor your way into CX, and then if you get enough people using that, then you can bring in the pure CCaaS product on back end, because front office, back office need to talk together, right? And so I think they're going to struggle initially coming into the blocks with CCaaS. I just think it's a tough market. As we talked about with NICE, right? CIO buyer, not the traditional buyer for CCaaS. Microsoft doesn't have those relationships. Okay, who is the traditional buyer though for something like Queues? It is the CIO. Microsoft does a great job of marketing to that person, and I think Queues is going to surprise some people. I think Queues app is going to get a lot of just sort of viral adoption. Because I'm running Teams, I might as well add this in, like I do with everything Microsoft, right? And so I think that's
so easy.
Yeah, so easy. Yeah,
It's
until
so
you actually get
easy.
to the deployment, you got to scale it. But by then it's too late.
Right. Like James, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting though what will happen with their formal contact center integration program as well. I mean, they have three models there. They still haven't certified the final model, and it says coming soon for 3 years. For 3 years now. So
Well, soon is relative. I mean, in the galactic sense, 3 years isn't really all that long, is it?
Right.
Yeah, true. True. Awesome. All right, let's move on to our next vendor now. Then that is Zoom, who really come up strongly in this space in the past couple of years. I don't know, Zeus, if you want to start on Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom is probably the most fascinating vendor in the space, right? They've got a lot of their adoption comes because people like Zoom, and I don't mean IT pros. IT pros do, but users love Zoom. And I've talked to many companies that had planned to go to another product, but then went to Zoom because the users are all banging their drum for Zoom. So they've got this big install base now. And the one thing I'd say about them in contact center, they are all in on contact center. I have never seen a structure where the CEO decided to make himself the GM of a group, but Eric is not only CEO, he's the GM of the group. And so I joke with Graham all the time that he reports to Eric and then Eric reports to him, as the GM. But they, I'll say, I'll quote one of the partners who I was talking to about this, who does a lot of Zoom business. He says he has been blown away by how fast Zoom has caught up with features in contact center. And so when they first launched, which was just a couple of years ago, it was a very basic offering. It was video only. It was meant for customers that wanted to bring video into the contact center. Since then, they've caught up feature-wise, and they can go, toe-to-toe with anybody as far as features and functions go. One of the questions I still have, like your thoughts on this too, Liz, a lot of their value prop is tied up in the UCaaS plus CCaaS value proposition. That really hasn't manifested itself in large enterprises. Down market it has, and Zoom's having a lot of success there. And they did announce their first big upmarket win, but I think that was a pure contact center buy. And I'm not fully convinced large enterprises really care about UCaaS, CCaaS integration. I think those are different buyers, different use cases. And because if that was a trend that really mattered meaningfully upmarket, we'd see one of the UCaaS vendors having captured more share. But when you look at the Gartner MQ and some of the other things, it's always the pure plays that are up at the top. And so I think for Zoom, they've pivoted their motion where they can compete with UCaaS, CCaaS, right? But they can also compete at a pure play level, and I think that's been important.
Yeah, I think the minute you become a commodity, I think the minute you become the adjective or the noun, like Xerox, or I'm going to open a Zoom, but you're really opening another vendor's video chat solution. You've got to figure out where the rest of your market share is going to come. And I think that Zoom has been very, very smart and very, very strategic in understanding that they could not continue to stand where they were. They were going to very quickly get drowned out of a very, very commoditized market. And I think that in the early days, you saw them kind of grasping at different areas that they could latch onto. Whether it was webinars, were they going to go farther down the marketing motion by buying an event company? Like it was all the things, right? And so I think that now the strategy of focusing on CCaaS is a smart one. I think that for where they have been able to innovate and where they have been able to push the needle, whether it is with video, whether it is with kind of asynchronous communications, I think that they will bring that same innovation mindset to CCaaS. And I think they've done a good job of kind of staying the course of not ruffling too many feathers in regard to what should we all be doing differently. That's Zeus and my job, but whatever. But what I think that from a technology front, they've really had that very solid base. The reason why I keep kind of being a little bit standoffish with them and not really just diving in and being like, yeah, I really like this solution. It's not because of the technology. The technology's solid. It's not because the company's solid. I want to see when they're finally going to let me know who they want to be when they grow up. It's like, I feel like they're in this teenage space of like, every day they want to do something different. And it feels like they're this teenager that's like, today I'm going to be an astronaut. Tomorrow I'm going to go be a cheerleader. And you're like, whoa, you bought all these things and they were really good things. You had all these really great ideas. When do those ideas come together? And there is so much untapped opportunity for that moment when all the pieces come together that I watch them continuously because I'm waiting for that moment. I'm waiting for that moment where they're like, oh, we're going to stop segmenting the events company over there. We're going to stop talking about it like it doesn't exist. Like there's so much rich untapped data. There's so much rich experience opportunity that's over on that event side of the business that I'm like, someday we're going to figure out that while we in the analyst world love to segment technology into these really sweet little categories, buyers and organizations don't. And to Zeus's point, the reason why a lot of that CCaaS and UCaaS has not merged into kind of one giant communications monster is that a lot of times it's different buyers, and different buyers are going to go look at a different MQ and they're going to say, no, I've got to buy these things. And if I want to go in the cloud, I've got to buy this thing. But once it gets into the enterprise, once it actually starts going, and at the enterprise level, let's also be honest, it's going in with an integrator. They're not doing it themselves, right? So you've got an Accenture going in there, or you've got a PwC or an EY going in and doing that. They're going in and looking at both of these alphabet soup CASs, and they're looking at them like ingredients. And they're pulling what they need to pull into the forefront, and they're mixing up that soup in a way that's distinctly for that enterprise. Mid-market,
the reason I think they'll
SMB
stay
can't
very
do it.
laser focused on CCaaS, though, is just the TAM. The TAM,
Totally.
when you look at the event business, webinar business, those are peanuts, right, compared to what capturing 10% of CCaaS is greater than, 50% of whatever the webinar business is, right?
But what happens when they combine all of that? Like, what happens when they stop thinking about it as individual motions and they really start to get people and get those large integrators to look at all of the pieces that make all of this work.
Yeah.
Like it becomes a very different conversation that no one else can have. No one else has this.
Yeah.
I mean, Citrix has some of the capability, but
Yeah.
like not really. It busts all the time, right? Like, so Zoom has all of this, and I want to see them build a different castle. Like I want to see them do something very different. That yes, from a selling motion, go capture that TAM. Absolutely. From a thought leadership and from a leadership in the market position, they have not stepped up to the plate, and I need them to do it.
Yeah, one thing I did really like from Zoom, actually, from the recent Zoomtopia, was the relationship with ServiceNow, which is something I'm sure we could maybe talk about in a different way in terms of...
Because ServiceNow has relationships with everybody now.
Yeah.
Who aren't they going and having relationships with?
But yeah, that's ServiceNow's way of backdooring their way into this space too, right? So
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah, I just mentioned that because, I'm seeing ServiceNow more and more in this space just because the AI boom is sort of pushing the decision onto IT pros who are used to using ServiceNow, and maybe that's something. But
ServiceNow went out and bought 8x8 or 5.9 or something like that. They could easily plunk their way into the space through a whole different lens. But that's a
Partnerships with Five9, everything's being built on it, right? Partnership with Genesys, partnership with Zoom. It's like the other side of the AWS picture.
Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, before I push us further into CRM and CSM, though, I will quickly do one more vendor before we take a halftime break, and that is 8x8. I don't know. Liz,
Speaking of people who want to get acquired, Speaking of someone to be acquired by
8x8's interesting company. From a vision perspective, they've been right in a lot of areas. They were the first company to integrate UCaaS, CCaaS. Remember, they bought that company SameRoom to try and bring messaging together because they realized that everybody having their own messaging platform was going to be a mess. They were a very early adopter to cloud. And so historically, they've been strong on vision, weak on execution. And they've replaced their CEO a couple times. Sam's a good execution guy, though, so he should help there. I worry they're a little too small now. When in a market of giants, the product's pretty good. I do like the recent repivot, though, to being CX first. Now, to your point, Liz, with Zoom being a little, all over the place, 8x8 has as well. They were a UCaaS vendor, then they went to an XCaaS vendor, and now they're clearly in the CX space first. Their product is good, and I think they've got to really be happy with focusing on small market, mid market initially. Although they do have some more big logos than people realize. But I think their challenge isn't technology per se, because I think they've done a lot of the work to integrate Fuse in now, and the back end product's actually pretty good. It's now that when I'm in a market with Amazon, NICE, Webex, Avaya, Genesys, all the Ring, Zoom, all these big vendors competing at this little tiny company with a market cap of a few hundred million, it's hard. It's really hard, and I think this new rebrand they've got to really hit 2025 pretty hard and make sure people understand who they are, what they do, and then stay the course. Right?
Yep.
If this is going to be your go forward plan, it's got to stay your go forward plan, because, like I said, product isn't your problem, market awareness is.
Totally agree. We're going to have one of these one day where Zeus and I violently disagree with each other. It's going to be a weird day, but usually I find myself totally nodding my head as he's talking.
That's because you're smart.
See, there we go. Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy. I think that with 8x8, I think that Sam has, to some degree, in that leadership role, not that he hadn't been with the organization, but as the CEO has brought financially driven and finance background focus to them, where it became we're not a CCaaS, UCaaS vendor, we're a business. Right. And I think that rigor, that understanding that you are a business and you have responsibility to the business, and the responsibility is to focus and lean in on the things we do well. And the technology, to Zeus's point, they do well. It's good tech. What they have
Yeah.
not done well has been stay focused. It's we're gonna go do this, and now we're gonna be huge over here, and we're gonna create this whole new category that doesn't make sense. Like all the things they tried to do took away from the focus on not just the technology, but quite frankly, their customer. And when you lose sight of the mid market, you lose sight of trillions of dollars. I mean, there's a reason why people really want to be in the mid market. Yes, you always want to chase the big sexy logo, but the mid market has it's a healthy market that you have to go after. I
Makes you
think
more
that
money
what
too.
I think what 8x8 has done really well has also been to recognize a really important point that Zeus made, which is when you're standing around giants and you're the little guy, you have to do something. And what 8x8 has chosen to do is ride on the shoulders of Microsoft. And that is not a bad strategy to take. With their Teams integrations, being easily in that, being easily in the marketplace, being a certified vendor, being one of the top vendors that you can do, going back to our kind of our quip about Microsoft of like, it's just so easy to add on. Yes, all of the contract redlining, gone, right? All of the questions of should I trust them, gone. If you're in the Microsoft marketplace and you're like, hey, I've wanted to try out 8x8, I've wanted to try out this feature function, you can go do that. You can have that available right in Teams. You don't have to worry about the integration. And I think that has opened a lot of doors. Has it sold a lot of deals? Clearly in their financials, it has for them. Is it going to rival, a Microsoft? Is it going to rival the size of what AWS is going to be able to do with Connect? No. But I also don't think that that's the goal, right? I think that the goal is that steady growth. How do we keep driving this drumbeat? We're not looking to be like a renewed, a reborn unicorn or any of that nonsense. They need to focus. They need to focus on that customer. They need to focus on the partnerships that are actually moving the needle. Certainly Microsoft is, certainly a couple others are. What I really, really like about Sam's drive is that it is inspiring other people who are within the organization that I haven't heard a lot of drive from in a couple years, and they're re-excited, they're renewed. They want to keep driving in this direction. They like the focus. They like being able to know exactly where the goal is. It's not just about where the puck's going, right? They want to know where the end goal is of how they're going to win, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think your point on being a good businessman is important too, because I think Vic Verma, their founder, was a great engineer, but
Yeah.
Engineers are great founders, but they don't often help you scale a company up. So that's where you need a product guy who's also a businessman,
Yeah.
right? And so there's really good product guys, and there's good business. Like I thought Sipes was had a great business mind, but I don't know how good a product guy he was. But I think
That's a good
Sam's a
point.
good combination of product and business, and he's leaving the engineering to the engineering team, right? And so, like I said,
Exactly.
too often, Charlie, I think founders that are engineers try and run the company as the CEO, and when you hit a certain scale, you got to turn it over to somebody else. And I'm hopeful that Sam's actually that guy that can do that for him.
And from a product perspective, I really like how they're thinking about data, right? That while CCaaS is staying CCaaS and while communications is going to stay communications, they're really looking at that interaction data platform and that customer interaction data platform as being someplace where data is really coming in. And from a very classical CDP perspective, they're leaning in on the words normalize and harmonize, right? And if we remember that a CDP is not a marketing toy for marketing things, it really is a customer data platform. This customer interaction data platform is really looking to bring all of those important moments into one normalized space. And this is data that is very hard to harmonize, right? This is data that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing when you bring the tags together. So creating all of that mapping and creating all of that schema is actually quite difficult. But they've got an engineering team that's on it, and they really have a vision for it that I actually really applaud, even well outside of the contact center and the service space.
Yeah, it is interesting how a lot of CCaaS vendors are evolving their data strategies. You had Amazon have bring out their own data lake. You had Five9 making that acquisition too. But I'm realizing the time, so I'm going to take a quick pause there for everyone, and we will come back very shortly. Excellent, and welcome back, everyone. That was we're back from our halftime break or 4/10 break or whatever you want to call it. I'm ready to talk about our next vendor on the list, and that is Cisco Webex. I don't know, Zeus, if you want to start by telling us why you find Webex to be an interesting brand to look out for in 2020.
Yeah, well, I think this is a make or break year for Cisco Webex in the contact center. they've put a lot of resources into us. Their go-to-market is CCaaS first. Well, they still have obviously a big business on the UC side. I think they look at CX as the way to be able to land a lot of new logos. And so they've loaded the product with AI features. If you saw recently, the company has restructured their product organization all under one leader now, Jeetu Patel. And so I'm expecting to see a lot of Cisco on Cisco things. And so, for instance, if we're running Cisco Contact Center and a Cisco network, or Webex Contact Center and a Cisco network, and there's some performance problems, you can use a tool like Thousand Eyes or Splunk to tell you why that is. And so they are gonna put the hard, full court press on Webex Contact Center this year, and they're going to use AI as their differentiator. And this is the year we're going to see whether all that work is paid off or not.
Couldn't agree more. I do think this is the make or break year. I don't think they have any more second chances, because I think we're at like the 10th second chance at this point. Especially in the Silicon Valley, you can't go far without hearing the old adage of ABC, right? Anyone but Cisco. And sadly, that legacy of kind of waiting for Cisco to get that second wind has kind of exhibited across a lot of their different business units. And I don't think the contact center is any different. I don't think the Webex solution is any different. I do think Splunk gives it a very new, interesting conversation, because similar to some of the other CCaaS platforms that we've talked about already, that Splunk customer base is a very different customer base. And now that they are getting introduced to the rest of the Cisco portfolio, does that give Cisco an opportunity to say, hey, have you started to look at your communications infrastructures and strategies differently? That gives them an open door to have that CCaaS conversation. I think the biggest question in my mind is, have they formulated a different CCaaS conversation than the rest of the market? One that leans into their networking heritage, one that leans into that infrastructure heritage, in a world where everyone is just kind of blindly talking about cloud and blindly talking about data. Do they have a different story to tell? I haven't seen it, but then again, it's December. So like if we're looking into 2025, I'm hoping that I see it very early in the year, but this is going to be the last. I think this is going to be this is where the rubber has to meet the road for them. I don't see many more opportunities to kind of recast themselves as something different.
Yeah, the security angle actually is pretty interesting too, right? Because you could argue
Absolutely.
that there's no CCaaS vendor that's got the security heritage that Cisco does. And the reality is the Webex feature and function suite, the product capabilities, both on the UC/CC side, is far better than their share reflects, right? And so now the question is, can they take this broader Cisco message and actually make that matter and start to gain some share?
Yeah.
I did notice too, actually, quite recently, that Cisco's fastest growing cloud product was its contact center. That came up on a media briefing. So that does give the source of some hope as well. Although when you look at their sort of big wins, it's not yet on the level of NICE or somebody like that. But hopefully that will come, given its deep.
One thing I'll say about Cisco is they do big well, right? So once the grown-ups get to the table and it moves away from startups and things, that's when Cisco really shines. And so for big global multinationals, Cisco does that really well.
Yeah.
And again, that's where the security thing comes in, right? That's where the security question comes in. And people will say, well, NICE has a security, like NICE has the fraud, and there's a difference between having an identity solution, having a fraud solution, and having a fully baked security solution, an observability solution. And what people are going to, at that high, complex, highly regulated global industries, are not going to look at a potential. They're going to look to someone like a Cisco, right? So I think there's a ton of opportunity there. It's just, I always get the feeling like there's always a chance to fumble the ball right before you get into the end zone. And for some reason, Cisco always feels like that group that could do that. I think that the rest of Cisco, again, to Zeus, your point, they're the grown-ups. And now the grown-ups have to enter the table in the contact center. They can't act like it's the new cute group that's doing all these cute things. It's got to be that grown-up conversation next year.
Yeah, it's also interesting, actually, you mentioned observability there. There's kind of given the impact of AI and, of course, autonomous agents, that's something to think about too. But I won't derail this conversation anymore. I'll go straight on to our next vendor, and that is Google. Quite interesting to see them on this list, actually. I don't know, Liz, if you want to start talking about
Listen,
Google.
you didn't tell me to rank the best ones. You told me to what you told me to tell you the ones I'm watching, and I would be foolish. I think all of us feel the same way. I mean, we all talk about it, right? Like Google made a lot of noise. Google makes a lot of noise saying what they have for the contact center. Do they have it?
Yeah,
Right? I
Google.
think I think becomes the big question, and I think it's a fair question that we all ask. And I think this past year, 2024, was when I really noticed all of my colleagues. Like when we all get together, we're like, "Is it like are we talking about this? Are we really doing this thing?" And I think that is the question. And much like we're saying, Cisco has 2025. I do think the runway for Google is a little bit bigger because I think Google keeps making its own runway. Right? Do I think that they have enough runway to really make a serious play and a really serious go as a real actual CCaaS solution? I don't know. And that's the reason why I'm watching them, because I think they've got a lot of momentum on the AI side. I think the Gemini product, it is merging as that head and shoulders above the rest when it comes to models. Their cloud offering and Google Cloud, you cannot argue with the cost of that workload, right? So you've got a lot of things heading in your favor. But do you have more than contact center intelligence and connectors into a lot of other solutions to actually call yourself a CCaaS or a CPaaS? And I don't know, because I'm not hearing customers come back and say, wow, that really changed the way I was looking at things. Do I think they have the potential? Absolutely. So is that the reason why I'm watching? 100%, because I want to see if there's a there, and I want to see how customers are actually deploying it. Because all the other things that Google has, as far as cloud infrastructure, cost of the workload, Gemini, they've got all the pieces there to truly advance an AI-powered contact center solution. And I really want to see that come into view and really have customers talking about it next year.
Yeah, as I said with Cisco, nobody does big better than Cisco. Nobody does big, perhaps worse than Google. They do have a lot of great components. They're really a lot high appeal in small businesses. But anything enterprise they've ever tried to do, they've failed at. I mean, they can't get out of their own way on docs and sheets and things like that. Gmail's used largely by small businesses. They've had a shot at UC for, my God, so many times, and it's a little. For whatever reason, we live in this world of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. But we've allowed people to fool us 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? Like we always think this is
Yeah.
good. In fact, Charlie, going back ways, even when I was at Yankee Group, my predictions for next year would always be in unified communications. Next year is going to be the year of Google, because that was the year I thought they were going to put it together, and they never put it together. They have all the components. There's no question if they really focused on it, they could do it. But I think, Liz, in a lot of ways, with Google, enterprise stuff is kind of rounding errors. When you look at how much business their search generates, even if they were to capture, I don't
Google
know,
Cloud is a rounding error.
yeah,
Like, let's be honest, like Google Cloud now becomes a really nice replacement if the ad network goes away at 11%, right? So,
yeah.
like, let's
Even
be
if they
real about who
captured,
Google is.
even if they captured 20% of the CCaaS market, which would be remarkable, it's a rounding error. And so the question is it really worth it for the company to throw that kind of R&D money into it to
Right.
be able to establish itself there? And so the answer to date has been no, which means it's going to be kind of some skunkworks projects they're going to try. And I think next year at this time, we'll be asking the same question. So I
Yeah.
think they're an interesting one to watch, but I don't really expect anything different this year than we've seen out of previous years.
Yeah. I think the place that I am focused when it comes to them is, where do they intend to put the output of CCaaS, all the conversations, into data that somehow transforms how an enterprise or even how a mid-sized organization can leverage Gemini differently. Because if you start to look at custom models and you start to look at custom inputs that can be directly from customer conversations, it becomes a very different trajectory. That intelligence model and that knowledge base becomes very, very different. The business graph can actually change. I think that's where they have the most opportunity, but that seems to be the place they're not looking. which sometimes confuses me, right? Like I can see where the puck should go, and I'm like, oh, you guys decided to bring a soccer ball out here instead of a puck. Okay, cool. Like, it's this very confusing decision making that I'm always like, I don't get it, but I'm going to watch it. Because the other thing that Zeus makes a great point that we always have to remember about Google is that Google is not Google Cloud. We want to talk about Google Cloud as being this really, really big success story. And it's not that it isn't, right? What Thomas Kurian is building, what the whole team is building, it is a success when you're looking at bringing that up. But to your point, it is 100% a rounding error, right? Their business is customer data. Yeah. Their business is advertising.
And I don't know, it's still Google Cloud's a distant number 3 to Azure and AWS. Yeah. Has it been a success? I guess from a revenue number, sure, but they've always been the third child.
Right.
So, yeah.
But I don't think that's a problem when you start to look at where Gemini could go. And that's the thing that I think we watch when it comes to, in the world of CCaaS, in the world of customer experience, and in the world of contact center, Gemini becomes the really interesting horse in the race, right? Because it's from a foundation model, it is beating the living tar out of things like OpenAI.
Awesome. All right. Well, lots of really great stuff there. And it is interesting too, actually, with Google's, the design of its solutions. It's great in terms of you can blend that AI very easily with channels and orchestrate a really good solution. But then I suppose if you do look at that and then you look at some of its other notable features like cloud failover, for example, that's essentially just UJET.
Yes.
So
I guess maybe we should get a UJET one to watch, right? So
yeah. Yeah. Okay, lots of good stuff there. And she mentioned AWS there, and let's switch over to them next. So lots of announcements about Connect from the recent reInvent event too. I don't know. Obviously, they're still gaining good momentum in this space. I don't know, Zeus, what you can tell us about them.
Yeah, I used to refer to AWS Connect as a dark horse in the CCaaS space, and I think they're a dark horse no longer. One of the things that impressed me about the customer base at Connect this year was when you think of Connect, it's always the Rocket Mortgages and the Cap Ones and those types of companies that are trying to be disruptors in their space, and so they go with a company like Connect to disrupt. This year, Air Canada, a couple of large banks, were on stage and things like that. It was more your traditional enterprise. And so they've moved out of that dark horse mode into, just just another viable CCaaS provider. I think this is the most interesting company to watch because they have access to the rest of the Amazon stack, which you could argue almost gives them an unfair advantage. They've got a 70,000 seat contact center in the Amazon contact center that acts as their own test bed that they can use to try out new features and see if they work and how they work and what doesn't work, right? And so when you look at those things together, I don't really see how AWS doesn't wind up becoming, the market leader in this space, or at least, one of 2 or 3 at the top of the de facto standard list. They're laser focused on this. I still do think there's a large amount of misunderstanding around it. When I bring Connect up to people, they say, well, it's really a developer-led product. But it's not anymore, right? They have loaded that thing up with features, and it can go toe-to-toe with any other vendor from features and functions. Then when you add in the kind of your unique pricing model, which is utilization-based, access to the Bedrock AI, suite of models, all the other tools that Amazon brings, this is a product that I think is here to stay, and I think here to do very well in the market.
Oh, yeah, this is well beyond Tinker Toys. Right. I think that, I was saying after reInvent that there are 2 ways to look at Legos, right? You can either want to be a master builder, which technically means you don't look at the instructions, right? You dream up what you have a thing that you want to build in your head, and you just take whatever pieces, and you don't need instructions to go build your thing. And I think that's what a lot of people have assumed Connect was. And you know what? In fairness to those folks, in the very beginning, that's kind of what it was.
They and Twilio had that model. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like, they're where we all wanted Twilio to go, right? Like, we were like, let's go that way. And Twilio's like, yeah, I think I'm going to go this way. And we're like, no. And AWS is going there. But I think that you can still, if you are a seasoned AWS developer and you are one of those organizations and you are a large enterprise where your IT organization is a strategic hub for all of your business units that are really looking to be disruptive, to stick with those patterns and norms wherever you want to be on that scale, but you have a strategic IT hub where you can go in and say, guys, we need to do this, right? And you've got this room full of master builders that are willing to go and take all of these blocks. You've got a really good set of tools in the Connect portfolio that you can still go and be a master builder. You can still have this idea of what you think you want a contact center, an engagement center, whatever you want it to be and wherever you want it to sit. You can use Connect as those building blocks. But you know what? There's also that other builder that just wants to build exactly what's on the box.
Yep.
They just want to build what's on the damn box. Yeah. You can go and do that with Connect, and they've now given you things. And Q for Connect is probably one of the biggest additions to that Connect portfolio that I think has really made a big, big wave. Q for Connect really connects the contact center, not just into information, not just into data. It's not about let's make the agent smarter. It's about let's make the contact center part of the business. Right? It's a very different conversation than a lot of people are having. And quite frankly, for someone like me, that's what the missing piece has been in a lot of these other, especially pure play standalone CCaaS solutions, because those solutions try to keep the contact center in an operational fiefdom. And they're like, APIs can cure it all. I'm like, hasn't worked so far.
Yeah.
Something like Q for Connect really becomes a very powerful tool that brings the contact center right into the middle of the operational reality of delivering experiences across the enterprise. You don't get to ignore it. You don't get to say, oh, it's too complex and voice is so difficult. It's there, like it's in the middle. And I applaud AWS for that attitude because it's like, no, this has got, you can't ignore it. And I actually think that's a really, really great motion. But what I thought was super interesting was no matter any of the features and functions, no matter any of the great solutions, how easy it is, how quick it was to deploy, because like the deployment models were insane. Like we were hearing from NatWest Bank at reInvent that they took their largest contact center and deployed that first. Like what? Like who does that? Like who's that crazy that you take your smallest one first, people? No, they took their largest one first and they had full total changeover to Connect in under 2 years, right? It was a year and 10 months, and they have all of their agents, all of their contact centers. It's like 9 contact centers that they've moved over, like some really impressive heavy lifting that they've been able to do onto Connect. And it's because the business had confidence in AWS Connect. So anything that they said they were going to do got done. And the business was like, yeah, sure. You want to roll that out right before our busiest season? Go for it. Like the business didn't stutter. And that's pretty amazing when you think about all of the other transformation plans we've tried to launch across the contact center. There's always a roadblock, right? So, and I think it also comes back to something very important that Zeus just said. The flexibility in their pricing model should not be ignored. While all of the other players out there are sitting there talking about fungible, non-fungible, pink, purple, glitter tokens, AWS is saying, turn it on, we charge you for it. Turn it off, we stop charging you for it. So people are able to get their sea legs and then they turn it on big. Like they're not experimenting, they're going. And that's a very different posture than anyone else is taking.
What's interesting too is Amazon as a company, the AWS team is always constantly interested in optimizing your spend. Do you have things in the right storage bucket?
Yes.
And I was talking to PQ about that, and they've in the last year, I think they've had, because they're always renegotiating their telco contracts. When they save money, they just pass it on. They just lower the price. And he says by doing that, we hope over time a customer spends more with us. Sometimes they don't, and that's okay. But we want to make sure that the customer's spending as little as they can. Right, and we're going to help them do that, and then for most customers over time that builds a lot of loyalty and you spend more. But he goes, sometimes people do spend less, and that's fine too. And
they're going to spend it on the other side of the business, right? Because AWS and Amazon are split. I don't know how many people kind of realize that, and they consider themselves very different parts of a business. Mm-hmm. So AWS is optimizing. Amazon's coming out with innovations, right? So they're coming out with the Nova model. They're coming out with new foundation models. They're coming out with recommendation engines. So like if you want to spend in the marketplace. You saved all this money. You can add new tools through the marketplace with a redlined contract where you don't have to stop. You could just, oh, you wanted to bring in WFM? You wanted to bring in Verint? Oh, it's on our redlined contract. So easy for Verint. So like, it's ridiculous. It's like a giant easy button.
Yeah. And I will actually say, I remember writing a story about Samsung earlier this year, and they chose AWS primarily because of their
they did.
But that easy button is why we spend so much money on Amazon. So.
Oh gosh, holidays, but isn't it funny that that's the model?
Yeah.
And that model works,
Yeah.
right? As much as we forget about it, it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. And to your point about the master, like bringing out solutions for both types of builders, it seems like Amazon's made all the moves that maybe Twilio should have made.
In fact, they launched at the same time, and this is what I was looking for Twilio to do, and they've largely disappointed us. So.
Excellent. So the next vendor that we have on our list to discuss is Avaya. I don't know, Liz, if you want to kick us off on Avaya.
Yeah. Avaya is a funny one, and it made my list out of like sheer curiosity over what's going to happen in the next year, right? You've got a company that still wears the cloak of bankruptcy filings, right? They wear it like a bad sweater that no one seems to want to let them take off, right? You hear it from customers, you hear it from partners where they're like, remember all those years ago when all of this happened? The fact that they have moved on financially and have a very healthy position now, does not seem to matter to folks. They still want them to be that company that keeps going bankrupt. Which is kind of an interesting factor about them, which I'm always watching. But they've got a new CEO, right? So they've got another transition. And I think the curiosity point for me is Alan Masrick really was focused on righting the ship, right? And making sure that both financially, but also, and I think less talked about from a product perspective, they were making decisions that were smart not only for their business, but for the future of their customer, right? And the whole idea of, and as much as people want to scoff it, right? The whole idea of innovation without disruption, that idea that within the contact center, you could take advantage of all of these things like AI, you could take advantage of things like automation, of self-service, but you didn't necessarily need to move, right? Because you had spent millions of dollars in customizations, even if it was on-prem, that you could start to move the workflows that mattered and the workloads that mattered to the cloud at a pace that made sense for your business. I think when they first came out with that messaging and the product roadmap that matched that messaging and then consistently delivered, I think people were at first like, oh no, everyone has to move to cloud. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly say that. Here we are now heading into 2025 with the very real understanding that hybrid is likely where we're going to be for a little amount of time, right? Especially at the large enterprise scale, especially where Avaya's core customers exist, right? These are not small businesses. These are not even mid-sized businesses. These are very large enterprises with very, very complex stacks and very complex workloads. So, I have them on this list because I'm genuinely curious what 2025 has in store for them. And I think we've said it before, 2025 feels like this make or break year for a lot of folks. This transition is 100% a make or break transition for Avaya. This either has the opportunity to take them into the next stratosphere or to push them right back down. So I think there's a lot of pressure on this new leadership team.
Yeah, do they belong on this list is an interesting question because we're talking about the 10 to watch in CCaaS. I've spent a lot of time with the new Avaya leadership team. And I will say, I think Alan Masrick had a good idea with what he wanted to do. I'm not so sure he was the right guy to execute on it. And
Interesting.
Yeah, well, and Patrick's, he's a PE guy, right? So he's an execution guy. And they're implementing the Broadcom playbook, obviously at a much smaller scale, where they are focused on the top 1,500 customers only. And so that's why they've had so many layoffs, including a lot of good people. And I've talked to other analysts about this that have said they've been upset that they let some good people go. Well, the fact is that if you're not aligned with the top 1,500, there really isn't a lot of use for that product. So one of the things that Avaya had problems with in the past, when you think of their heritage, right? They spun out of AT&T, and so they serve customers all the way from 1 to 1 million employees, right? And
Yeah.
everything in between. And over time, they've really shed a lot of that small market, mid market, but they still have a lot of the products around. So if you're not core to that, you don't really have a home at Avaya anymore. Now, so this raises the interesting question on the CCaaS side. How much appetite do those top 1,500 companies have for CCaaS? One of the issues with CCaaS, of course, is you can only buy CCaaS, in 50, 60 countries, right? I was talking to one of their larger bank customers. They got locations in 170 countries. And so the only way they could actually have one platform across them all was to stand up Avaya's private cloud, right? Because you just can't buy CCaaS in all, in all the countries they operate in. And you're not going to be able to do that for a long time. And so this hybrid model we're going to live in for a long time. I think a lot of those big governments, I know somebody at one of the 3-letter agencies that said they would never move to cloud. Now,
Yeah.
Maybe not in that person's career, maybe they eventually will. But I think by the time everybody, all those big global multinationals move to cloud, we'll all long be retired. So there is a short term, the medium term opportunity for Avaya to mine that customer base, how cloudy they get, how CCaaS they get, which is by our definition is shared multi-tenant, right? Offers a public cloud service. I don't think that that's going to be that big an addressable market, but I think there's a long runway for them to be able to monetize the base they're in. And so it's going to be a very interesting year just from a business perspective. Again, are they one to watch in CCaaS? That's hard to, I would say probably no there, but I do think they are going to figure out this. This will be the first year in a long time we'll see Avaya profitability up, and that's the key focus of Patrick Dennis, who again is a private equity guy, is driving profitability. And if you look at the way Broadcom runs that business, they shed a lot of the customers when they buy companies, but at the end of the day, their operating margin 60%, right? And so a little bit of that kind of discipline of Avaya is going to go a long way. It's unfortunate a lot of the people are going to be let go, but that's something that should have been done with that company a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, the bloat has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing specific to CCaaS and Avaya is it is for any PE guy coming in, looking at the TAM just on the CCaaS market that we all talk about, right? It's going to be hard for them to keep discipline around not wanting to chase more of that CCaaS market, potentially not only out of their 1,500, but in that top level fast mover space of mid-market to enterprise. Right. And so
he's not a chaser. So yeah.
No, he's not a chaser, but he's also going to face pressure from lots of financial and external sources, right? That are going to be like, what are we doing with this? What are we doing in this space? You clearly have customers in this space. What are we doing in this space? And I think it's going to be an intoxicating allure to want to perhaps start to not, I don't think visibly go back and really push the way previous incarnations did, but wow, it's a really sweet siren song, right? If you've already got customers there.
Though, the bang for the buck there isn't there. For them to go, if they would have to acquire their way into it, or because it would take too long to build a true
as they've proven.
I mean, product that's comparable with NICE or Zoom or whatever, right? So, and then would it be differentiated enough to be able to go take significant share to make that R&D investment worth it, right? So, or M&A money worth it. So, I think he understands that's not the case. And like I said, there's a lot of money to be, a lot of profits to be made in that top 1,500. And frankly, in that large customer base, it's very hard to decouple Avaya from the processes they've got built in place. And so doubling down on that is going to do them far better, more good long term than trying to chase mid-market companies.
Yeah.
And that enterprise base is huge. I think is it still 90 out of the Fortune 100 or something? So
I
mean, the reality is that all of us probably use Avaya tech. Whenever you call a contact center, if it's a large brand, odds are they're in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's going to be given the headlines of those layoffs recently, it will be interesting to see what noise Avaya do make next year, and if there will be much.
I don't know how much
Absolutely.
noise they're going to make
Yeah.
because, again, if you look at the Broadcom playbook, if you're focused on that top segment of customers, you're talking to those customers intimately, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you
It's
have to
that
do a lot of,
silent but profitable. Yeah.
yeah, you don't have to do a lot of
Yeah.
press releases to market to that base because they're not trying to expand the base. Now, eventually, they're going to have to figure that out, right? But
Yeah.
for next year, I think it's right. It's focusing on that base. I don't know how much we are going to see them, Charlie. Honestly, do a lot of public things. So
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Well, let's move on to another vendor then that is making a lot of noise around sort of AI agents most recently, and then integrations with Salesforce and ServiceNow, and that is Five9. Zeus, what can you tell me that we can look forward to from Five9 in 2025?
yeah, Five9's a fascinating company. They've been really, outside of NICE, maybe the poster child for CCaaS, right? And they've carried that mantle for a long time. I mean, financially, I was looking at it earlier. Their stock's down almost 50% this year. They've had a lot of activist activity involved in the company, but I think they finally have the product to the point where it's much more reliable. They've got a lot. Jonathan Rosenberg is one of the best AI guys in the industry, and he's added a lot of capabilities to it. So the question is, in any crowded industry like this, I also think with Nikki Halder, they've done some great things on the marketing side, but can they rise above the noise? I think they've got a much better product today than even a couple of years ago, but it is much more crowded. But I would still look at them as being, they're a leader in one of the MQs. And the thing that I've liked about Five9's business historically is it's been very steady and predictable. They don't have a lot of upside surprises and a lot of downside. They did have a couple of quarters they missed this year though. And Dan Berkland, their head of sales, ceded that to somebody else, and as an effort to create more dedicated focus to it. Frankly, that should have been done a while ago. But I think what we've seen out of Five9 these last couple of years is a lot of growing pains, right? As they've gone from a company that have served the small market, mid market, to one that now is trying to go more after large enterprises. That's different financial disciplines. You forecast differently, you sell differently, and I don't think they had those skills in there to do that. So I think 2024 was a year of growing up for Five9, and I think 2025 needs to be the execution year for them.
It was a lot of growing pains last year, right?
Yeah.
This past year, and I think that what Five9 experienced is going to be experienced by a lot of CCaaS vendors, if not every single one of them, right? If you're a pure play CCaaS and you don't necessarily have that on-prem heritage, what you're experiencing for the next 2 years is that 3 to 5 year contract cycle coming up for renewal. And I think the hard thing for CCaaS in general, so this isn't specific to Five9, but Five9 is certainly going through it right now, is that when we saw this massive cloud shift and this cloud boom, it was experiments still, right? So a lot of Five9 customers and a lot of the big logos they kind of splashed up 2-3 years ago. Like, remember when Rowan would be like, here are all of our great new logos, and you'd kind of look at them and, like, I think in all the backs of our minds and even in the hallways of like analyst summits, we would all be like, aren't they running 3 other tests right now? Like, hey, Don't you guys remember seeing them on this company's NASCAR slide or this company's just landed slide? And what was happening was you were seeing either divisions or individual contact centers being rolled into essentially like this giant cloud sandbox. And I don't think any of the vendors quite understood that they were being performance tested against one another, but they were also being performance tested about what we just talked about, of what happens if I stay in a hybrid solution. I've put so much into these customizations. What if I run things over the top? I think the vendors who had a really smart strategy about being able to run contact center specific services, be them WEM, be them analytics, be them AI, over the top of any channel, bring your own channel scenario, and consider that on-prem channel management with everything else being over the top, they're going to see an easier 2 years as people start to get out of experimentation mode and really start to full-fledged move into cloud and decide which horse they're going to pick in the race. I think where Five9 got out a little bit over their skis in the sales motion was a lot of that original sales motion was far more rooted in how everyone else sucks, if I'm just being super blunt. Now what they are doing, and I think the rigor that both Mike and Nikki, Zeus, excellent points on both of those two leaders, the rigor that they are bringing now is, hey, we have to talk about how we're differentiated. We have to talk about how we are leading the market, how we are, like, it can't always be about how Cisco's terrible, right? Like that can't be your sales motion, because they're not, right? And customers are finding that they're not. So how do we differentiate? And I think they've brought a lot of that conversation and a lot of that rigor in. I think the thing that I'm excited to watch over the next year, I mean, the technology, I think to Zeus's point, it is leveled out. It is reliable. People are finding their groove with the implementation. That was not the case even 2 years ago. I don't know about you, Zeus, but I felt like I was constantly fielding customer gripes. Like that didn't really happen.
Right? They weren't 5.9, that's for sure. So
yeah, no, and that was a challenge, right? But I think the product team has leveled out. But more importantly, the product team got a major influx of excitement and innovation potential with the naming of a new chief product officer, right? And so you have someone who is going to be looking well beyond the CCaaS market, or even, quite frankly, the contact center. You have someone who comes in from that larger view of how data and process and workflow around customer has to come together. So I think that there's a lot that we can look forward to in 2025. I do think that it's going to be a year of really interesting change, because what everyone seems to be telegraphing is this bigger picture for Five9 outside that might, take them outside of that comfort zone of the contact center. And that's going to be really rough waters. That's not going to be a comfortable place for them. So what my hope is that some of that retracts and that they really revel in what they're great at, which is delivering these really practical applications that people are using. And when they use them, they love them. Like when you get a happy Five9 customer, there's no one who is more willing to shout that from the rooftops and show exactly how the practicality of that technology. And to your point, the AI, you're not going to find many people better at this, right? So I think that 2025 is going to be super interesting, because I think they're going to come out with a value statement of what they're driving, as opposed to kind of the aspirational agent force. Like it's not going to be that aspirational message. It's going to be stories about what customers are really doing and the value that they're really driving. And I'm really excited to see that.
I know the person that's really big on that is Nikki Hall. She's a big voice of customer person. She ran that playbook at Content Square and Polycom before that when she was there. And I know they, Alaska Airlines, Lululemon, they've got some really good marquee customers, and being able to highlight those. The other interesting person there has been this year, going into next year to watch, is going to be, will we continue to see more of Jonathan Rosenberg? He's a really smart guy. I think there's a bit of a gap in the industry there too, Liz. Nobody really is driving thought leadership at an industry level. Obviously we are, but from a vendor perspective,
I mean, except for us, yeah.
From a vendor perspective, how does AI really change? What are the, societally, what does the long-term contact center look like? And I know over the back half of 2024, you and I, in fact, have done, some activities with him, and I think he's going to continue to be an interesting, person to watch. And so, more thought leadership and more customer stories are what I want to see out of them.
Oh yeah. I want to see a Jay and Jonathan team up. Like, how does product, because I think the interesting thing that if you start to look at different playbooks, right? Like we've talked about the Broadcom playbook. There's plenty of time to talk about things like the Genesys playbook and all of that kind of stuff. I think what's so interesting is that Jay brings in an Adobe playbook, right? He brings in a very different product playbook, and that, along with how AI can integrate throughout product as opposed to standing alone as if it is a product. I cannot wait to see their joined story come to life, because that's when the rubber's going to meet the road, right? And that is when I think we start to see Five9 take on a very, very different thought leadership posture than it is now, right? Because it's trying to fight through a cluttered market, and it's doing that very well. And Nikki's doing a very good job with that. I think that with the Jay joining the team as a chief product officer, now you have new product thinking, new product innovation, plus Jonathan's thought leadership. The two of them, that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's much more I want to add on Five9 actually, but maybe that's a different conversation.
That's for the hour-long versions of these,
Well, they
Charlie.
might be the most interesting company to look at next year because, they did have kind of a tumultuous this year. They had activists involved. They brought in some new leaders, and so they might be, the vendor to watch next year just
Oh,
just
they're gonna be
because of
fun.
all the change they had. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one actually that wouldn't necessarily have been on my list now, but I'm interested to see them there is Nextiva. I don't know, Liz, why you thought they would be a good choice for the 10th and final.
Mainly because they're making a lot of noise.
Mm.
And for me, noise doesn't necessarily mean success. Sometimes noise is just a whole lot of noise. And I think when it comes to Nextiva, the thing that I'm very interested in is they're claiming to work with a whole lot of fairly large names, right? And I think that's largely been, from whether it's legacy solutions, whether it is their AI, whether it is, some of their channel work. But I think that they're coming up more from my customers, right? From end users that are looking to do something different in two very specific ways. AI, self-service, and automation, right? They are very much, these are customers who are like, yeah, I got voice. You're like, yeah, I've got the standard channels. I need to do something very different because my customer service, my engagement pattern and motion is very, very different. These are usually brands that are digital natives. These are brands that lean in heavily to social across not just their social service, but also their social marketing, but also social commerce, right? So these are brands that are very much looking at how do I look at asynchronous communications, but then also headless commerce? How do I take two things that the contact center and typical CCaaS solutions do not necessarily look at building together? Like we're still talking about how can our agents make sales, right? In commerce, there's a very different motion for that. They're like, we know how here, it's digital. So I think that with Nextiva, the reason why I'm looking at them is because they're super noisy. Do I think that they're going to be ones to watch like, wow, they're going to knock the socks off of everyone? This is the most amazing technology I've ever seen. They're doing things so differently. No. And I want to be very, very honest about that. But the reason why I find them interesting is because 2025 is more going to be like, I'm just going to be super selfish. It's going to be about me trying to figure out if there's a there because the noise they're making has come up really fast. Customers are asking about them. The jury's out for me. Zeus, you might have a more definitive reaction to them than I do. But for me, the more my end customers are asking, the more I have to figure out, is the noise just noise? Or is there something really there, especially if you are a high touch commerce, high experience commerce, digital native brand? Does this become a really viable solution for you?
Yeah, they're not really they are kind of a full-fledged CCaaS solution, but they're much more on the digital side. And it was interesting that you, in a full disclosure, Liz, you put them on this list that you did.
Yeah, I did.
Because there are a bunch of like these oddball vendors that aren't traditional pure CCaaS vendors that are approaching it from different angles. I hear a lot about Nextiva. I haven't seen them a lot in the field. So until I do, it's hard for me to call them that. I think the marketing the marketing dollars are thrown at it far outweighs their actual presence in the field, but you got to start somewhere. If I were to pick one of these sort of oddball companies to look at, it would be more like a Cognigy or something where they're a little more quiet behind the scenes, but they're being used by RingCentral and a bunch of other companies. They're OEM'd into the products, but they have Lufthansa now, and they really do have some meaningful customers. And so I think, Charlie, maybe the takeaway from this last vendor is we have focused primarily on the traditional CCaaS providers. When you look at the landscape today, like I said, Cognigy, Nextiva, there's Unifor, there's UJET, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about Google. There's a bunch of other companies that are, Verint's another one, that are encroaching upon the CCaaS space from an angle other than voice. Given the amount of interactions we're doing that are non-voice, one of these vendors is going to come up and, I think become a really interesting one to watch next year or so, or maybe more.
I think the interesting thing about the companies who have been asking me about Nextiva are they're primarily coming in from some of the Indian-based SIs, where part of what they used them for was voice. Like part of their entry point was because it's an easier digital voice solution that they wanted to recast what CCaaS was going to mean. And I think that for me, that's the biggest thing to watch in 2025 is that, let's be very honest. In contact center, our greatest tradition is getting comfy, right? Like we like getting comfortable. We like burrowing in, right? Like we're never going to change these phones. No one's ever going to have a computer. No one's ever going to have a computer on their terminal, right? Like no, ever. It's just going to be a headset and a notebook, right? Like, and how long did we do that? And then it was, no, we're going to be at desktop terminals. No one's ever going to work from home. No one's ever going to have a laptop. No one ever needs to do their contact center job from their mobile device. And we spend an awful lot of time holding on vigorously to our standards and norms, to the point where even when we were trying to define CCaaS, there was a whole lot of debate. It's like, no, it's literally like a cloud solution. It's as a service, everyone, right? So I think that we get real comfortable. And these oddballs, as Zeus has rightfully called them, are asking us to turn the definition of contact center as a service on its head by not having it be voice communications as a service, right? It's not because, and I think that that's a big thing, is that we're in our effort to call this a contact center, everyone still holds on to the norms of a call center as a service. So everything has to center on voice.
Yeah, it's a contact center, not a digital interaction center, not a call center.
Call center. And I think people get real uncomfortable with that. I mean, Zeus, you see it. Like, hey, listen, when we go to Analyst Summer Camp for contact center solutions, you will have people like arm wrestling in the center of the room being like, that's not my world. My world's call center and there has to be voice. And you're like, people actually don't like calling Netflix. It's just like that's the reality of today's market and today's customer. And I think at the end of the day, this market and the people, like, hey, at the end of 2025, when we're talking about the 10 brands to watch, I guarantee you those 10 brands to watch are being most moved and being most impacted by what the end customer says that they want, not by what, even us is analysts, as much as we want to shape that. And we really do believe that our moving the finger, moves the rest of the market. Listen, their customers want something different. And folks like Nextiva, these oddballs, they're the ones coming with this sentiment that, hey, digital voice is still voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Zeus, in that you mentioned Cognigy, and I will say they're on our conversational AI vendors to watch.
Oh, yeah.
Also on Nextiva, they have been making a lot of noise within the space too. Even at a call center show I went to in the summer, I left my hotel, left my glasses on the side. When I came back, they were in a Nextiva glasses case, and it freaked me out a little bit, if I'm being honest.
That is hysterical.
Shows their marketing prowess, I guess. But yeah, that's 10 vendors. They're very good vendors. But I do feel quickly that there is a bit of an elephant in the room here, and that Genesys, a vendor that fronts a lot of analyst reports into the space, isn't on our top 10 list. It'd be interesting to hear kind of why neither of you picked them in your top sort of fives.
I feel like we were each waiting for the other person to do it, right?
Well,
we were like,
in our defense, you did call it ones to watch. I think with Genesys, their playbook is fairly well understood. Frankly, if they are doing something different, their analyst relations team hasn't done a very good job of articulating it. But I think we all understand what the Genesys playbook is. It's convert the install base, and I think they are what they are. And so, are they a meaningful vendor? Yes. Are they one to watch? I think we know what we're going to get out of Genesys next year. The only thing to watch would be, are they actually going to IPO next year? That would certainly be interesting. And actually, I think if they do IPO, it's important for the entire industry that IPO goes well. Because if there's one sector today that Wall Street hates, it's CCaaS, because they feel that AI is going to kill every seat out there. and it's going to drive the economic value out of the industry. So a successful Genesys IPO is a success for the industry. But I think as far as their strategy goes, it hasn't really changed much over the last couple of years. It's been fairly well baked, and so
I mean, hey, did you know they were moving to the cloud? Yeah, they moved to the cloud. Did you know that? What? Yeah, like I totally agree. I mean, this is listen, I adore the people over there, right? Like Ginger Conlon's one of my favorite people, like on the planet. I see these people and I'm like, yeah, they're doing good work. Genesys, like, hey, if you're going to look at Genesys, you're going to get a solid product. You're not, okay, great. But do I feel like I need to watch what's going on over there? Because it's like, oh my God, they're going to shake up the market so much that it's going to be just absolutely wild. I don't feel that. But I also don't think that's their goal. Like, I don't think they would be upset about hearing that, right? Because I think that Genesys and that strategy, to Zeus's point, it's about being that slow, steady, reliable. They're not leaping just because everyone else leapt. And their customers appreciate that. I mean, I actually had an opportunity to speak with some of their customers at a customer event they did in Orange County, California. And the number one thing I kept hearing from everyone was, you know what? I can trust that I'm going to turn it on. I can trust that I can implement it. We're not moving fast. This is what we're doing. And so it kind of fits. And so I don't think I need to watch them because they're still going to be there. But I would also say, if you want people to be kind of understanding of where those innovations are coming from, you have to let us know.
Yeah.
So I think they, from my perspective, they are what they are, and I think they'll be that next year. And it's a well-run big company that we're all waiting to see them when they IPO.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one thing I did get excited earlier in the year about their sort of integration with Salesforce and then ServiceNow. Although then Salesforce released a kind of bigger program which gave 17 other vendors almost the right to do sort of the same thing. Yeah. And then ServiceNow had a similar announcement with Five9. So that may be
there is a real danger in calling smart partnerships innovations.
Yeah.
And I think that originally the partnerships were cast as these really like, oh my gosh, these are going to be so incredible. We're going to change the market because we're doing it. But I think we all understood. And again, I think this goes to the earlier point of we're not, as analysts, I think we're very used to hearing about whether it's partnerships, whether it is innovations, whether it's product. We're used to hearing about it a little ahead of time, if not being part of kind of that strategic rollout. I mean, probably if anyone's had a big innovation, Zeus has probably been part of it. Let's just be very honest here. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about him here, right? They're part of that strategy and that roadmap. Yeah. And it's like, you would be hard pressed to not find some very familiar names as part of those strategy sessions, like a Sheila McGee-Smith, right? Like Zeus. Like you're going to find these seasoned names as part of it. I just don't feel like that's there at the moment. And I think probably we would have all said like, whoa, like tap down this excitement on the language. It's a great partnership. Be out there and say that you're first because you're a leader in the market and you're leading the way in being an open ecosystem and being part of an environment that is larger than just your contact center space. You're now opening up all this data, all these other places. But it was within like 3 months. Everyone's like, us too. We've been working on it for months, right? Like everyone else kind of came out. It's like you don't go and tell everyone that you have a partnership with AWS and that's somehow super, super unique, because AWS wants to partner with everyone because they're going to be everywhere. ServiceNow inherently wants to partner with anyone and everyone in the ecosystem because ServiceNow's job is to be the platform of platforms. If you don't have everyone building on your platform, you're not going to be the platform of platforms. So it's a great partnership. I'm not knocking it in any way, but you can't run outside and scream that it's super unique.
Yeah, well, ServiceNow was the partnerships in 2024 were basically this year's version of Salesforce, right? Everybody partners with them. Everybody now partners with ServiceNow, and they should. I mean, ServiceNow is a great company.
Yeah, nice. Google will. I think we'll see a lot of partnerships with Google next year. Certainly, Google Cloud, especially with Gemini coming out really hot, and they're doing a lot of things on the Gemini model. So, I mean, those partnerships are going to keep rolling. AWS, Google, like it's going to happen. So, good partnership.
And
Not
I'll be there to
necessarily.
overhype them maybe on
Yeah.
CX. But no, I think that's really helpful. And so we covered 11 vendors very well there. But I'm conscious that I've taken so much of both of
11
your
of your
time.
top 10.
So
11 of the top 10, exactly.
exactly. Well, that's a great place to end today's chat. I think I want to thank Liz and Zeus very much for joining me today, and also thank you all for watching. Bye for now.